In today's video, we're taking a look back at Vince McMahon's most unhinged booking decisions in the WWE during the 2000s.
Cash only. What kind of outfit are they running here?
This was an era known for its bold, controversial storytelling. The video today isn't just about wrestling. It's about understanding how the entertainment we love has reflected and sometimes failed to reflect the cultural landscape of its time. In the 2000s, WWE, particularly Vince, was known to push the envelope from a racial and cultural standpoint.
Hold it down, trying to take care of business.
Keep it up, I'm a nigga.
This really got kicked into high gear when Trish Stratus was forced to bark like a dog by the evil Mr. McMahon character. But during the 2000s, after WWE purchased WCW, when there was no more competition, Vince went wild in their creative meetings. And I'm sure some of the people in attendance for those meetings wished some of these ideas would have stayed in Vince's head, or at least the meeting room.
If you're not Caucasian, then leave. Mark Henry.
But no, some of these ideas actually made it to television. The Ruthless Aggression Era was a time when WWE veered into racially insensitive territory. From Teddy Long's controversial, borderline racist character to the infamous Durag Vince era to everything in between, we're going to unpack what these stories meant then and what they mean to us now. This is not just a trip down memory lane. It's a journey into how wrestling has navigated the complex waters of race and representation. Let's get to it. The 2000s in WWE, particularly during the Ruthless Aggression Era, was a period marked by Vince McMahon's unfiltered creative reign. After acquiring WCW in 2001, WWE became the sole dominant force in professional wrestling, with no direct competition to challenge its creative direction. This lack of competition allowed for an era where McMahon's booking decisions often pushed boundaries, sometimes in ways that were controversial or culturally insensitive. The early 2000s saw WWE transitioning from the wildly popular Attitude Era, which was known for its edgy content and anti-hero characters, into the Ruthless Aggression Era. This time frame aimed to introduce a tougher, more competitive spirit among the wrestlers. This period was characterized by the emergence of new stars like John Cena, Batista, and Brock Lesnar, each embodying the ruthless aggression which McMahon wanted from his stars. However, this era also saw a return to more traditional good versus evil narratives, but with an adult twist. McMahon's approach to storylines often included elements that, in retrospect, are criticized for racial insensitivity or cultural appropriation. From the portrayal of Teddy Long managing Thuggin' and Buggin' Enterprises to Vince McMahon's own Durag Vince character, these decisions reflected a broader trend of using racial stereotypes for entertainment value or shock. McMahon introduced us fans to the Mexicools, a group of Mexican wrestlers that rode lawnmowers to the ring, a clear nod to negative Mexican stereotypes. Kung Fu Naki, an Asian stereotype that played into the martial arts trope. Muhammad Assan, a Middle Eastern character that played into post 9/11 fears, which quickly became too controversial for TV. Then there was Crime Time, a tag team whose gimmick was rooted in criminal stereotypes of black culture. No stereotype was safe, as white culture was a target too when Chavo Guerrero introduced his Kerwin White character. Honestly, bro, it was like we were living in a real-life South Park episode or something. Vince did everything in his power to book the most envelope-pushing, borderline offensive content he could. According to Bruce Pritchard, this was all because he was bored after WCW closed down. At the time, some of these storylines were met with laughter, or they were shrugged off as part of wrestling's over-the-top nature. However, as cultural awareness grew, these same decisions were later critiqued for their insensitivity. The 2000s under McMahon's booking left a complex legacy in WWE's history. While it was a time of great financial success for the company, it also highlighted the need for more thoughtful representation in wrestling storylines. As the decade progressed, WWE began to shift, especially with the transition to the PG era, which began in 2008. At this time, content was toned down, and there was a move towards more family-friendly entertainment, although that era has its own set of criticisms. The 2000s in WWE were a testament to Vince McMahon's creative control and his willingness to push boundaries. While this era gave us some of wrestling's most memorable moments and characters, it also serves as a case study in how entertainment can reflect or challenge societal norms, particularly around race and culture. Understanding this period helps us appreciate how wrestling has evolved in its storytelling and representation, striving toward a more inclusive and sensitive portrayal in the modern times. Let's start with one of the most infamous examples of Vince McMahon's controversial booking decision in the 2000s, Teddy Long's Thuggin' and Buggin' Enterprises. Teddy Long, who would later become a beloved general manager, was initially used in a role that played directly into racial stereotypes. Rodney Mack, under Long's management, would regularly participate in a segment called the White Boy Challenge, where he'd quickly defeat white jobbers, playing into the narrative of racial superiority or rebellion against racial oppression, but in a way that was criticized for promoting harmful stereotypes. Long's promos were laced with ebonics, and the group's name itself was a nod to a negative stereotype about African American culture, suggesting criminality or street life. Let me just play a quote from one of Teddy Long's promos to illustrate how wild this was. I honestly can't believe this is real.
Versus the Heartbreak Cracker next Monday night. Now, you feel me, player?
While some fans enjoyed the heel heat this generated, there was also an underlying discomfort with how the group was portrayed. The gimmick was seen by some as WWE trying to capitalize on racial tension for entertainment. Over time, this storyline has been looked back on with criticism for its one-dimensional portrayal of black characters, reducing them to stereotypes rather than giving them complex, unique identities. Despite this controversial start, Teddy Long would later be celebrated for his role as the general manager of SmackDown, showing a more positive representation of African American characters in WWE. This booking decision reflects a broader issue in wrestling during the 2000s, where racial stereotypes were often used without much regard for the cultural implications, highlighting a need for a more nuanced storytelling. Thuggin' and Buggin' Enterprises is a prime example of how Vince McMahon's creative control could sometimes be hurtful in terms of cultural sensitivity. Moving from one controversial booking to another, let's talk about one of Vince McMahon's most bizarre character transformations, that is, the Durag Vince era. This storyline took place in 2007, following McMahon losing his hair during the Battle of the Billionaires at WrestleMania 23. It's a prime example of McMahon's willingness to push cultural boundaries. I honestly don't think Vince knew any limits at this time. After losing his hair when Bobby Lashley defeated Umaga, McMahon decided to embrace the bald look by adopting a persona that included wearing a durag, which was part of a storyline where he became ECW champion. I'm sure this move was seen by many as a disgrace to everything the original ECW stood for. McMahon's character began using African American vernacular English, and he wore a durag.
What's up, Holmes? What up, G?
Elements that were perceived by many as cultural appropriation, especially given McMahon's previous booking decisions with racial undertones. I mean, it's pretty easy to see why. He is an old white billionaire. To be fair, this is a form of entertainment. At least that's how wrestling great Bobby Lashley saw it. He's spoken about Durag Vince several times, noting that he found it both ridiculous and hilarious.
Oh man, I was like, oh, that's heat.
As ECW champion, McMahon would defend his title in comedic ways, often using his ridiculous persona to generate heat or laughter. McMahon's promos included phrases like holla 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 and other stereotypical expressions, alongside his new fashion choice, which was seen by many as a mockery of African American culture. He literally came out on WWE TV and said he was going to whip his thing out. If you look up ridiculous in the dictionary, a picture of Durag Vince should pop up, in my opinion. The character was met with a mix of amusement and criticism. Some fans saw it as typical McMahon shenanigans, while others felt it was a tasteless use of cultural elements for cheap heat. This period adds a layer of complexity to McMahon's legacy. The Durag Vince era serves as a marker for how far WWE has come in terms of cultural sensitivity. While the 2000s were rife with such controversies, modern WWE has made efforts to be more inclusive and respectful in its storytelling. Now for my last examples, we're going to take a look at two more outrageous characters from Vince McMahon's controversial booking in the 2000s, the Mexicools and Muhammad Assan. Both of these gimmicks are emblematic of WWE's approach to racial and cultural representation during this period. In 2005, WWE introduced the Mexicools, comprising of Psychosis, Super Crazy, and Juventud Guerrera. Their entrance was heavily criticized as they rode to the ring on lawnmowers, playing into the stereotype of Mexicans working in landscaping. Their gimmick was overtly stereotypical, with the group's name itself, Mexicools, seen as a play on words that probably didn't sit well with a lot of people. Their promos often included exaggerated Spanish accents and cultural references that were not well received. Literally, their entrance music had sounds of a lawnmower starting up, and they came down to the ring one time holding inflatable Corona bottles. I mean, I don't even know what to say, bro.
Yeah, that's those guys that get back. That's 2D, and that's super crazy.
Part of me believes that WWE got away with this stuff because it was just viewed as wrestling by the general public. It seems that people look at wrestling with a dismissive attitude, like that harms no one, it's fake, and nobody even really watches it. Maybe the general public doesn't have a good grasp on how popular and influential wrestling truly is. Think about it. I was a 9-year-old Hispanic American watching this stuff at the time. Maybe I shouldn't have been. I don't know. Where were my parents at? Over time, this gimmick has been remembered as one of WWE's most egregious uses of cultural insensitivity. Needless to say, this gimmick didn't last long on WWE TV. The Muhammad Hassan character was introduced in 2004, and it was portrayed by Mark Copani, who in real life was born and raised in New York, and I actually believe his family is of Italian descent. The Muhammad Hassan character was an Arab American character who initially spoke out against racial profiling post 9/11. However, the character brought a lot of controversy with it, and quickly. The storyline escalated when Hassan had masked men rush the ring and attack The Undertaker, with the masked figures implied to be terrorists. This angle was particularly sensitive due to the real-world context of global terrorism fears. And I mean, what, this was 4 years after 9/11? I don't know, the timing on this one wasn't so great. Like, bruh, Vince McMahon really had an Arab American character commit a terrorist attack on an episode of SmackDown. To say this angle was bad is an understatement in my opinion. Then to top it all off, the terrorist attack segment aired the same day as the infamous London bombings, a real-life incident which saw Islam terrorists set off suicide bombs on the streets of London. Of course, this led to the canning of the Muhammad Hassan character, and despite WWE trying to erase it from history, it just can't. I mean, we're still talking about it now, almost 20 years later. Now, to be fair, WWE recorded the segment well before the incident took place. It just so happened to air on SmackDown during the same day. SmackDown, of course, was pre-taped. Talk about bad timing. Both cases illustrate a period where WWE, under McMahon's control, often prioritized shock value over sensitivity, raising questions about the responsibility of entertainment in portraying different cultures. These storylines are part of WWE's history, where the company has had to learn from its past. Nowadays, WWE attempts to navigate cultural representation more carefully, though these examples serve as a reminder of what they should not do. The Mexicals and Muhammad Hassan are emblematic of an era where WWE's booking decisions often crossed cultural lines in ways that were not only controversial, but also damaging to the perception of wrestling. As we wind down on this trip down memory lane of Vince McMahon's most unhinged booking decisions during 2000's WWE, it's clear that this era was as much about pushing creative boundaries as it was about inadvertently highlighting the need for cultural sensitivity in entertainment. These stories, while memorable, serve as cautionary tales about the impact of storytelling in wrestling. They remind us that entertainment, especially one as passionate and as global as wrestling, holds a mirror to society, showing both its progress and its prejudices. McMahon's booking decisions in the 2000s sparked discussions that have led to a gradual shift in how WWE handles race, culture, and representation today. Wrestling has come a long way since these days, with WWE now striving to present more nuanced characters and storylines, acknowledging the diversity of its fan base and its performers. Yet looking back at these examples allow us to appreciate how much has changed and how much we've learned about the intersection of entertainment with cultural awareness. Remember, while we can look back at these moments with a mix of nostalgia and criticism, they're also a part of wrestling's ongoing story, one of growth, reflection, and the continuous effort to entertain while respecting the world we live in. What was your favorite moment from this era? Were you a fan of these outrageous characters and segments, or was it too much for you? Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you on the next one.